Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to Higher Ed Revolution number 3. And this Higher Ed Revolution, we're going to be talking to Jill Walker Rettberg from the University of Bergen in Norway. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about how Higher Ed Revolution is doing and tell you a little bit about the blog. Jesse's also going to be talking about some interesting articles that you read this week. And straight over to Rob.
Hi. I had a great interview, which we'll do in a little bit, but I wanted to sort of update you all on Burlington College. You got my note last week about Burlington College closing and its impact on Oplerno, which is, I really feel for, the students and the faculty and the community at Burlington College. But just to reiterate, it doesn't really impact us too much. We're always looking for different partners and institutions to work with. It's really sad that Burlington College is closing, but there's not a whole lot that can be done. For those of you who don't know, Burlington College is a small liberal arts school that got started in the 1970s in Burlington. It was really student-centered and student-focused. Then in the several years ago, it bought under the leadership of Mrs. Dr. Sanders, who is Jane Sanders, who is Bernie Sanders' wife. They bought a really large property and became, it was too much property for them to service a debt on, and their financial situation deteriorated. Burlington College, like lots of small colleges in the Northeast, really is struggling with enrollments and trying to get students to come to their residential schools, and also the cost, because there are lots of different resources that are available online and lots of different resources are available at other schools, and Burlington College was fairly expensive. While it was turning the corner and increasing enrollment, they were working with us on a few classes. We were working with their faculty. The fact of the matter is that the debt that they had caused them to come under review from the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, and they said that they were going to revoke their accreditation in January. That rumor caused a bank, People's United, which had $1 million credit line, because running a school is expensive, and sometimes cash flow occurs with tuition dollars in the spring and the fall, and so they needed some cash to run through the summer. Their credit line was eliminated, and there was no way that they were going to be able to operate. So Carol Moore announced that the college was going to be closing, and they announced that on Monday. We've gotten some feedback and some questions. Again, Burlington College doesn't impact us materially. We'd like to get one of our invoices paid, but that's okay. What does affect us is that another college that really was student-centered is going away and is closing, and while those students can go to some other institutions, it really speaks to really a huge crisis in higher ed that's now starting to hit in terms of affordability, in terms of these busted business models. So we need to keep Burlington College in our thoughts, and really I hope there's going to be some investigations done of both relationships in the board, their board of trustees, to property developers, because that beautiful property that is Burlington College is now has been seized by the bank, and is also going to get developed into quite expensive housing for not for everyone. It was a beautiful parkland, a beautiful open space, and that's pretty much going to be gone and getting converted to private homes, and somebody's going to be making quite a lot of money off of the fact that this college is closed. And I hope there's an investigation. If you want to read about it, please check out 7 Days, which is a newspaper in Vermont. The Burlington Free Press has some coverage, but it's not all that great. Vermont Digger generally does a really good job also, vermontdigger.org. And keep an eye on it, because Burlington College is a really excellent test case for what's going to happen all over the country in the next couple of years. So that's it. You guys, the Burlington, Carol Moore, over the past year and a half, because she was the interim president, she took over a really disastrous situation. She cut their overhead, their administrative overhead, by over 80%. I know she was working really, really hard at streamlining different processes that were quite expensive for them. There's a lot of inefficiencies in higher ed, and you can read about it in my book that's published on Amazon. And they center around administration, but really, I think what's driving the closing of these facilities is the tuition costs and the fact that the institutions are servicing debt, and the students are having to take out these really large, substantial loans to attend, and they aren't guaranteed a job afterwards. And if you're making a gamble, unless by being $50,000 or $100,000 in debt, if you don't really have kind of a job or a form of employment afterwards. And I think people are waking up to that, even though the federal government guarantees a certain level of Stafford loans and you can get private loans. People realize that debt is slavery, and that it's the worst thing that you can do to involve yourself in, is to get in a large amount of any kind of consumer or student loan debt. And I think it's going to happen all over in the next several years. I mean, I think we're finally at the breaking point, and we're seeing the dominoes start to fall. What about you? And you can view an interview that I did with Carol Moore last year on Burlington College by clicking on the link on your screen. So before we go further, let me introduce the interview. Okay, Jill Walker-Rettberg is professor of digital culture at the University of Bergen. Her book's called Seeing Ourselves Through Technology, How We Use Selfies, Blogs, and Wearable Devices to See and Shape Ourselves. This is an interview that we taped a couple of days ago, and we're inserting here, and please take a look, and we'll be back with you in just a moment.
Actually, my parents were academics. They came here on sabbatical in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And just never went home. Actually,
Okay.
Came back. So I'm actually an early transplant. I've been here since I was a kid, actually. So I was really happy when I started studying. I was interested in hypertext. Was sort of the early 90s, and I was just thrilled to learn that. Suddenly realized I was doing my MA in comparative literature here, and I realized that this wonderful guy, I'd been reading his book, Cybertext, that he was in an office down the hall. So I went and knocked on his door very sort of nervously, an MA student, and asked if I could talk with him because I was interested I'd read his book. And now, of course, I realize that for a student to have read your book is kind of awesome, actually. So, but I was amazed that he would talk to me, so it turned out to be a great place to do research on digital media.
So in the early 90s, and who was that professor?
That's Espen J. He wrote the book Cybertext in the mid-90s, and he was one of the founders of the Game Studies magazine journal and so forth. So he's one of the founders of studying computer games, really.
Yeah, I came across my interest in using technology in the classroom comes from a group actually in Sweden and Norway, Asa Sariman, who wrote a book called Imologies, which the really interesting work was being done in Norway and Sweden, and then all those hypertexts. It was a big yellow book called Hypertext with all these articles in it and talking about how reading had changed. That you couldn't. That now you had narratives where there were many possible pathways through something. So it was sort of like perfect with sort of like the postmodern shtick, Frederick Jameson and post-structuralist theory, where there were multiple meanings to things in text and no one way to get through it. And using the internet and using hypertext in an old Apple computer, it was amazing. What we now know as wikis, and really, Wikipedia, wikis, and the way in which some of us are using podcasts and our academic writing to create links where people can go off. You click on an underline, and you can read actually the original documents or pull something up. It's a great thing. So yeah, that you were very early on in that work then, if you were in the early 90s.
Yes, although I discovered that, people had been working on this for decades already, which was, I was so lucky to actually, get to make connections with people. Espen J became my advisor later. He just sent me off to conferences, the hypertext conferences. And
Oh,
so,
wow.
yeah, but I found all that so inspiring. I read, so Vannevar Bush is like, they talk about Vannevar Bush as the grandfather of hypertext. He wrote right after the Second World War, he wrote, "We've developed all this technology for warfare, for medicine, for everything except for how to think. We're not using technology to help us think better," he wrote. And so he proposed this device he called the Memex, which is pretty much sort of like the internet if you didn't have digital technology. So it uses microfilm, and he imagined making links between different microfilm documents. And one of my favorite quotes from that is he talks about how in the future there'll be this profession of trailblazers, and they'll be the people who create the links. And I just love that idea. Quite a lot of trailblazers people who make links, and we have the perfect environment to do it in on the web.
Yeah, and everybody can participate, and it's really interesting that those hierarchies are really, and we can talk about this. Those hierarchies are really, I think, kind of breaking down. In the mid '90s, my first attempt at a master's program, I was at the University of Chicago, and I was writing on how technology changes hierarchies in the classroom and how it had a chance to break down and change the way in which we're delivering higher ed. And my advisor, who's in the anthro department, hated it. Okay, because it was taking away that privileged piece of knowledge. Have you encountered sort of the same thing? I mean, you're involved in a research of something that is, and you kind of hint at it, I think, in a couple of in the readings, that you're not a technology is going to liberate us camp. You're in much more of the pragmatic camp, I think. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Okay.
Well, I love technology. I see amazing potential, but there's also so many ways in which it's certainly not a simple, more democracy, more freedom, more empowerment. There's all sorts of new power structures that are being developed with it, I think. And I think, as you said, I certainly experienced many people like your professor in the 90s who I think feel very threatened by just the shift in power, which is really interesting to me. One of the first blogging experiences I had that really showed that was when Henry Jenkins, he's a really well-known professor of media. He was at MIT at the time. And he wrote an opinion piece, an op-ed on blogs in like 2001 or 2 or something like that. And he published it in, I think, the MIT Technology Review or something like that. And he said bloggers are the cockroaches.
Yeah.
Oh! And of course, the blogosphere exploded. Everyone was like outraged at this professor dude thinking he knew anything about blogging. And the thing that I thought really sort of showed that things had shifted was when Henry Jenkins, the professor, had to go and defend himself by posting something on one of his students' blogs, because that was the only way he could actually participate in that conversation, right? And to me, that really exemplified a shift in power. He was relying on his students' blogs. Then
yeah.
Henry Jenkins is definitely taken to the web. I mean, he surfed that wave pretty thoroughly, I'd say. So, but there's definitely a shift that happened there. That still there are people who aren't quite, secure in the ways things work.
There seems to be, there are always, right now, the digital, they talk about the digital natives and the people that have, the immigrants to, to the digital space. Although for a lot of us, we've been involved in something, digital or some in-between space since we were little kids, even though I'm 48 and, you're probably in your 40s, maybe. So, the same deal. And now we've got this really weird situation where the people, at least the way I see it in the States, sort of people who are in charge of institutions, especially in higher ed, are so disconnected, many of them, from understanding that the old media, whether we're talking about newspapers, TV, or cable, is really being, hardly anyone pays too much attention to it if you're younger, okay? If you're under the age of 35 and you want to figure out what's going on, you don't even go to Facebook anymore, okay? Facebook is for grandmothers and grandfathers and old people. People are using like Snapchat, Instagram, and all of that. And the blogs have a huge following, and in some ways more people reading blog entries by certain bloggers than are reading newspaper columnists.
I wrote an op-ed every few weeks for the local newspaper here in Bergen for a year, and they kept telling me, remember, your audience is the 55 plus generation, because this is in the print newspaper. So you've got to write it so 55 plus year olds are going to be able to read it, which, that tells you something about who reads newspapers, right? But the other thing is here, I recently saw a survey where there was recently a discussion where a young woman, she's a 15-year-old entrepreneur who started like a fashion blog site that's making, tens of thousands. And she told the media, young people don't read blogs anymore. They're for 40-year-old housewives who are interested in fashion, makeup, or, interior design or something. And so I actually talked to a researcher who's actually done surveys and so forth. And he says, the last 5 years, the average age of blog readers, at least in Norway, has increased. So now the average blog reader is about 35. So that might mean, I'm not sure I'm quite convinced. I think the young people are still probably on blogs, but maybe they're moving even further. Maybe we're losing our grip.
Yeah, I think we may be, there's always that danger, which is why I try to, I've got good friends who have, kids, and try to, hey, what are you guys using? How are you communicating? And seeing where those networks are. I think that depending on, there's so many different cultures now that have the ability to communicate within their own groups, but also that you can see, okay, like the secret language of teenagers, okay, is now, if you want to lurk, it's in Instagram and Snapchat. And if you want to see what, suburban Americans are doing, then go on Facebook. Okay. If you want to see what, more technical people are, interesting, like some, subjects that are more scholarly, then it's hitting the blogs. So it's, the medium is the message even more, as, McLuhan said, but that old stuff, the TV, national television stations, all those things that were controlled by the establishment just seem to have fizzled. I mean, they, Rachel Maddow, who's a big commentator in the States, she has, I think, only about 250,000 people watching her every night. And she's touted as this huge voice. And they're... What?
DJ Khaled has way more than that watching his Snapchat.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. And so all those things that we think about, who is creating the voices, is just, is upended. And it's really, really fascinating.
The thing that worries me is that there's a bit of now I'm going to sound like an old person, but just watching Snapchat, because I've been paying a lot of trying to understand Snapchat recently, and it's the stories that I can understand the most easily because they're openly available. And if you look at like the live stories that they create, it's a very particular voice, and I've read they're watched by like 20-30 million people, each of these daily little 2-minute live stories. And so, well, for instance, yesterday it was a national day in Norway. So for me, I have small children. It's all about the children, and so forth, and the parades. Snapchat's version of the live story of Norway's celebration was all about like the 23-year-olds drinking champagne and like, I don't see that. Where is that? And it's interesting because it gives you a very particular view of what does the world look like, right?
Right.
And sure, previously that idea of what the world looked like was determined by television and television and newspapers and so forth, mostly run by old guys, I suppose. But I think things like Snapchat are actually going to have a huge, huge role in defining what we think the world is like. Like I know about going to Mecca for the Hajj last year by watching the Snapchat live story about it, which, after seeing their version of Norway's National Day, I'm guessing that's a pretty skewed vision of it, really. It sort of looked a bit like a party, actually.
Sure. Yeah, tough to tell. I mean, I'm really exploring a lot on Instagram. And one of the things I like to do is go running. So I'm exploring, you know, people who do trail running and ultra running. But I came across a subculture of people who are traveling around North America or the world in vans that they've redone. Okay. And they're living in vans and working in sort of their digital nomads. It's different than, you know, the cultures of people living in vans in Europe. It's more along the line of, you know, it's sort of, you know, harkens. It's just different. But that I would never be able to find pictures, daily pictures or people to communicate with 5 years ago. If I wanted to create a sense of community. So it's almost as if, you know, the notion of community no longer, it is place-based, but it can extend out to be interest-based, which is completely mind-blowing when I think about what it was like in the 90s where we were, you know, trolling the Usenet groups, okay, and finding different things. And it was like, that was amazing. You know, we can, you know, look up obscure science fiction authors and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. Great.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Very interesting interview, and I think especially what she said about the blogger, this teenage blogger who said that or fashion blogger who says that blogs are dead, and basically everybody should be on, or everybody's on Snapchat, or the teenagers are on Snapchat and Yik Yak and all these other things. It's very interesting. I think that's absolutely true. It's one of the reasons why I blew extra life into our Snapchat channel as well today.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I after the conversation with her, I've started to look at Snapchat and Weibo, WeChat, also because the digital, you know, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram are totally for different audiences now, and it is crazy though how many platforms you have to be part of to figure out what exactly is going on. So great. Let's move on to the next piece. Jesse, do you want to talk about what you've been up to? And yeah.
Yes, I have. My dog is also very curious about what I've been up to. She welcomed me back home last night, 2 nights ago rather. It's good to be home back in Portland. I was back in Wisconsin visiting some family at a very meaningful time in our lives. In any case, I've been quite busy as a result, but I was looking at the website yesterday, got some intriguing or inspired comment from Rob this morning as well as to where we can go, and I'm looking forward to having more than a draft, something ready to shift into by the end of the month. I think we're there. I think there's enough content. I think there's enough design, you know, that we can go and we can iterate as necessary. So we look forward to having feedback from the community within Oplerno, and we really, really, really look forward to having feedback and input from any new users, anyone that comes across the page. The idea being that we can immediately address your needs and thoughts. I would say, in a nutshell, that is the idea for the design. We want to start conversation.
There's also, it's really interesting, the whole plethora of course offerings that are being created and also we're going to have access to. So yeah, it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to that redesign, and also, you know, the growth that is happening through the use of changing the format of our team meetings to Higher Ed Rev 3. I'm getting a lot more interest in terms of, you know, interviewing other people, giving some extra information, and talking about some of the news items, which is the perfect segue into Daniel and Higher Ed Rev on Medium.
Yeah, indeed. So, quick stats for the for Higher Ed Revolution. The blog on Medium, we are now up to 2,800 followers. That means that we increased by 200 this week, which is great. We have our Carol Moore video that we did with Burlington College last year that you mentioned previously. That one got an amazing amount of extra views. I re-edited it and uploaded it. Our Cringer Hansen went completely crazy. 50 views. So people are really enjoying that. Yeah, we're just having a great. There's one article that I want to mention that we published this week, which is called "Rigorous STEM Courses Embrace the Soft Stuff," which is by Kieran Matheson. He's spent some time with a keynote speaker at the 10th annual conference on teaching and learning in Oakland University, and it has a whole story of what his conversation was about and all the things that he learned in that. That's really, really cool. And you'll be able to click on the link in settings.
Yeah, and if you've got an idea for a story, of course, you can submit it to Medium. But if you also have a new book out or you want to be interviewed, please shoot us an email and we'll include you in that section that we did just before, when we interview people about what they're working on. And I've gotten a few of those in the inbox. And we're going to be interviewing them in the next couple of weeks and adding that to our, to the stable of podcasts and interviews that we have.
Yeah,
great.
I'm uploading that to Snapchat as we speak.
Yeah, and it's funny with Snapchat. It's only available for 24 hours and then it disappears.
Yep, exactly. So it doesn't really matter. We can upload any old to them. Just
and then it's gone. All right. Okay.
My interview with Deb Donsky has been postponed a week. So I had mentioned last week that it was going to be aired in this session, and we didn't really address the fact that it's not. So it will be coming. Just stay tuned. I really look forward to speaking with her. Yeah. So I have a quote here that I wanted to throw in, but perhaps it's not the best time.
No, throw it in. Throw it in.
It was by speaking other people's language, you can bring them into the processing conversation. We are translators. This was with respect to being a designer and a collaborator at the same time. And I really like the sort of the parallel with learning language that is sort of insinuated in that statement. Because anytime I've traveled, I've noticed that my language, my slang, my use of even body language, I'll say, has changed. And what it means is that we are dynamic social creatures, and that as we engage in conversation and as we empower other people to be a part of growth, it will inevitably become positive. So that's why I keep sort of hitting this nail of encouraging people to reach out and let their voices be heard. Students, teachers, community members, anyone.
That's a perfect way to end it. And Higher Ed Rev number 3. Join us next week for Higher Ed Rev number 4. And thanks a lot for tuning in. And we'll talk with you later. We'll see you online.
See you online.
Ciao. See you online.
Well, one of the things that surprised me doing that kind of work is that some of the most conservative voices, to my mind, are from the students.
And at the same time, there was a lot of outrage about the banks being bailed out. I mean, this was public, as we all know, as we recall that history.